Welcome to Plodcast, episode 107. 107. Thanks for having me along. I hope you're enjoying your drive or whatever it is you're doing. I've been asked, I've been asked in different ways what I think of the whole Josh Harris thing. The I Kissed Dating Goodbye phenomenon went on to be a pastor in the Sovereign Grace movement for some time, Sovereign Grace Ministries, Sovereign Grace Churches for a while. He recently announced his divorce, and then announced just a few days after that he was no longer a Christian. And then after that, I just read that he has marched in his first gay pride parade. So the apostasy, he's traveled the full extent of the downward arc that's found in Romans 1, almost the full arc. So what do I think of this? Well, the first thing is to point out that it's obviously sad. It's obviously sad for his loved ones who still are faithful to Christ, and to see him fall away is just a normal, heartbreaking sort of thing. But it's not as though this whole thing was a total blindside. The one thing, Josh Harris's career has been made out of, shaped by kissing things goodbye. He kissed dating goodbye. He kissed his wife goodbye. He kissed his Christianity goodbye. He kissed his commitment to the biblical sexual norms goodbye. The one thing he's not kissed goodbye is Josh Harris. So where would I assign where's the culprit in this? Well, obviously Josh Harris is responsible for his decisions and for his actions, and nothing I'm saying here ought to minimize that. He is a responsible agent, responsible before God for the things he decides to do. But is there any systemic problem? Well, yeah, I would place a significant part of the difficulty, a significant part of the problem with evangelical celebrity culture. In other words, he was launched into the stratosphere of evangelical stardom when he was a very, very young man. And I don't think that was smart. And part of the reason for that, I think, had to do with the position that homeschooling was in at the time, where homeschoolers were taunted and maligned, and some of them reacted by feeling like they had something huge to prove. Okay, so yes, I was homeschooled, and I'm going to Harvard on a full ride scholarship for my work on the violin and in astrophysics. So there's some people who reacted, okay, well, we're gonna dunk the moon and hang on the rim, right? We're gonna show everybody, and so there will always be people who drive for excellence and who strive for excellence, and Josh Harris was launched to a position where he was a teaching authority way too soon. The Apostle Paul tells Timothy not to ordain a neophyte. The Greek word is neophyte. Don't ordain a neophyte, he says. And Tyndall's translation says don't ordain a young scholar. Don't ordain a neophyte. Why? Because if they fall into the sin of pride, they become prey to the devil. And that's what we have here. I think the problem with Josh Harris's fall, I think, largely resides with his rise. Who promoted him? Why did we promote him the way we did? Why did he receive the adulation and the praise that he did? So what goes up must come down, or at least what goes up in that way must come down. Oh, whether we will be God. Continuing with Plodcast 107, we come now to hamartiology. We need special creepy music for the hamartiology section, I think. Well, hamartios is the Greek word for sin, and we're looking at all the different Greek words for various sins. We've already considered the verb that expressed unbelief, apisteo, and the noun, apistia, is obviously related. Jesus did not do many miracles in his hometown because of their unbelief. Matthew 13:58, Mark 6:6. The disciples were unable to cast out a particularly stubborn demon because of their unbelief. That's in Matthew 17:20. It's striking that in Mark's account of that same incident, the father of the demon-possessed boy cried out for Jesus to save him from his own unbelief. That's in Mark 9:24. Lord, I believe, help thou my unbelief. Jesus rebuked his disciples after the resurrection for their reluctance to believe those who had reported him risen. That's in Mark 16:14. Paul exults in the fact that the unbelief of man is incapable of thwarting the faith of God. Romans 3:3. When Abraham was promised a son in his old age, he did not stagger in unbelief. Romans 4:20. The unbelieving Jews were broken off of the olive tree of the true Israel because of unbelief. Romans 11:20. If they give up that unbelief, they're going to be grafted back in again. Romans 11:23. Before Paul was converted, he was an evil man, and like his countrymen, was caught in the web of unbelief. 1 Timothy 1:13. So Christians are told to guard against the sin of unbelief. Hebrews 3:12, a sin that results in departing from the living God. The Jews in the wilderness could not enter God's rest because of unbelief. It tells us in Hebrews 3:19. And in the same way today, Christians are to resist unbelief, a sin that remains a sin, even if we give it a fancy theological name. If we call it theological sophistication or theological nuance, it remains unbelief. Eugene Genovese, in one of his books, he was an atheist who later became a Roman Catholic, became a Christian. And he said whenever he was talking to, in his atheist days, whenever he was talking to a liberal Christian, he had that deep, assured feeling that he was in the presence of a fellow unbeliever. God don't never change. So our book review this time around is by a couple of people, Boldrin and Levine, and the name of the book is Against Intellectual Monopoly. Against Intellectual Monopoly. Now, this book is all about, it was quite a fascinating book, and I'm sort of on a jag right now because I'm reading another book that may come up in a future podcast on the same topic on patents and copyrights. The U.S. Constitution explicitly grants the authority to grant patents and copyrights to Congress. But it does so, and it says, quote, for limited times. And the title of this book is quite striking because it's called Against Intellectual Monopoly. And usually when people are talking about this issue, they want to talk about intellectual property. Okay? Now, it's quite a challenging issue. Can you steal an object by successfully reproducing it? Can you steal an object by reproducing it? So here are different challenges. Suppose we're living in a very rudimentary technological society. Things are pretty basic. And one day, your job is hauling rocks, and one day you look across at your neighbor whose job is also hauling rocks, and you see that he has built a rudimentary wheelbarrow, and he's loading his wheelbarrow up with rocks, and he pushes it, and he's having a much more productive day than you are. And the first thought that's going to occur to you is to get yourself a wheelbarrow. Now, here's the thing: if you go over and steal his wheelbarrow, then that's simply an issue of property rights. But if you say, "Oh, what a great idea," right, and you go into your shop and manufacture your own wheelbarrow for hauling your own rocks, Have you stolen anything from him? Or make it even more basic. Instead of carrying logs, he gets his son to carry one end of the log and he carries the other end of the log. And you say, hey, that's a good idea. And you get your son to carry it into the log. Does he own that technique? And you say, well, of course, that don't be ridiculous. Well, here, this is the issue, because we're well into the realm of the ridiculous. The U.S. Constitution gives Congress the authority to grant patents and copyrights for limited times. There are two other forms of intellectual property. There's patents for inventions. There's copyrights for like novels and poetry and stuff. Then there are trade secrets, and then there are trademarks. So the Nike swoosh is a trademark. The way Colonel Sanders makes his chicken taste like that is a trade secret. The way Coca-Cola makes Coca-Cola taste the way it does, that's a trade secret. A book that a novelist publishes that he published last year and he holds the copyright, that's the copyright. And a man who invents something can get a patent for it. Well, should you be able to patent a football play, right? Should you be able to patent a play where you read and you say, well, that's kind of ridiculous, right? Well, it's been attempted. We're well into crazy times. So when Congress first began patenting or allowing for copyright, I believe the period of time that you granted for an author was 14 years. In other words, someone wrote a great book. It was a big seller. You granted him a head start, and he could get his book to market. Other people couldn't make cheaper editions of the same book and profit off of his creative work, and have him not receive any income from your cheap version. Well, now it's something like it started out at 14 years. Now it's something like 75 years past the death of the author. So we are well into the regime of what these authors call intellectual monopoly, which is not the same thing as intellectual property. Now, let's say suppose you go into a restaurant, you really like the sauce that they have on the steak, and you ask for a box you don't eat all of it. You ask for a box, you're a great cook, and you go home and you reverse engineer how they did that sauce. All right, okay, and let's say that sauce is a trade secret. You reverse engineer it, and you're able to duplicate that sauce, and you serve it to people in your home, and they can't tell the difference between the sauce that you made and the sauce that this famous chef at this restaurant made. All right, so you've duplicated what he did. Have you stolen anything from him? Now that's not a simple question. You didn't break into his premises. The only thing you took with you was the steak and the sauce that they sold to you. How is it possible to be a thief by reproducing it? Okay, so intellectual monopoly is because if I invented the reason this is such a big deal is because of digital music and because of movies and pirated editions and all of that. Making copies of something is now cheap and easy, and there are some intellectual property anarchists who believe that all information should be free. And someone's going to say, but then you're going to destroy innovation. People are going to stop producing stuff to copy if you have a state of anarchy. But then if you have a state of total bureaucratic overload, which is where we are now, you are inhibiting innovation the other direction. So, for example, when the steam engine was first invented or the cotton gin was first invented, a lot of the early battles over patents prevented those inventions from being improved. Once someone could, once the thing is out there in the market, people can tinker with it and improve it. But then if they're in a costly 10, 20-year battle over patent law, everybody suffers because they don't get the improvements. So intellectual property is a good thing, but we have to figure out a way to protect intellectual property without having it grow up into an overgrown monster called intellectual monopoly. And this book, Against Intellectual Monopoly, is a good place to start if you're interested in this sort of thing at all.
You've spent a pleasant half hour with Plodcast proprietor Douglas Wilson. This podcast is produced by Canon Press. Please take a moment to subscribe to the Plodcast on your favorite listening platform. To hear more from Doug, please visit canonpress.com.